Hello and welcome to the Future of Dogs podcast, a place for the whole dog world to come together and ask the big why and what if questions that will shape the dogs of the future. Join me, Hannah Molloy, dog behaviourist and body language expert, as we chat to some of the world's most groundbreaking professionals intent on enriching and evolving the future for dogs. This series is sponsored by Amplified Behaviour, my online video school where you can find quality dog behaviour and training advice at a fraction of the price, because I believe everyone should be able to afford the knowledge that they need to give their dogs the best life possible. Let's jump in to the next episode. Hello and welcome to another deep and meaningful episode of The Future of Dogs. This is The Future of Dangerous Dogs, Part 1, Assessing. And it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you easily one of the industry's most well-known experts in the particular field of dangerous dogs, Dr. Helen Howell. Dr. Helen Howell is a forensic behaviourist and she specialises in human-directed dog aggression. She is an expert witness in the UK for dangerous dog cases and is also an expert in breed identification for the purposes of Section 1 of the Dangerous Dogs Act. Helen has worked with dogs all over the world, including game-bred pit bull types from fighting backgrounds in the United States and street dogs in India and Sri Lanka, and Spanish hunting dogs in Spain too. Helen is an international conference speaker and dog bite prevention educator in her local community. It is so great to have you with us, Helen. Hello.
Hi, it's lovely to be here.
And it's especially lovely to get to call you Dr. Helen Howell because you've just got your PhD, am I right?
Yes. So eventually, after 4.5 years of research, I am now able to say that I'm a doctor.
Yes, we've been celebrating that for ages because you and I have known each other for a couple of years, haven't we, Helen? And you've been working so hard in this field, and we are all so grateful for the research that you've put out. That we'll definitely get into a little bit more. But can you tell us, to start with, just for those that don't know you quite as well as I do, Helen, how did you get into this as a study topic? Like, where did this come from, this passion for you?
So when I started doing expert witness work, I very quickly realised I have a background as a detective in the police. So that's what led me into being an expert witness. And when I started doing expert witness work, I very quickly realised that the quality of behaviour assessments varied hugely. Some were great and some were just appalling. And I found that quite shocking, I think, because when I was a police officer, I worked on child protection. And so I was used to the model for risk assessment of human violence, which is quite structured and formalised in the criminal justice system. So I sort of expected the same thing to happen for dogs and was just shocked that there is no standard way of assessing dogs. So
just to clarify, Helen, for those that don't know what an expert witness does, your job as an expert witness for dogs is to do what? What do you have to do?
So my job is to help the court understand why a dog may have behaved the way it has, whether the dog poses a danger to public safety, and whether there are things that we can do to mitigate risk going forward.
Okay. So you'd get called in, someone's dog has done something a bit tricky, and then they get sent to police kennels, and then they'd call you in to come and assess the dog. That's right?
Yeah. So an expert is independent. So regardless of whether it's the police that ask me to do an assessment or whether it's the dog's owner that asks me to do the assessment, the job of an expert is to help the court. Mm-hmm. So you're independent. So you would go and assess the dog, and I assess the home and the owner as well and their capabilities. And then I present that evidence to court if there's legal proceedings. So also, I assess dogs for when people are looking to adopt children or foster children. So local authorities will reach out and ask for an assessment of dogs that might be in the home to see whether the dogs are okay to be living with the children that they're intending to place in the home as well. So there's kind of lots of different contexts really for assessment, but most of my work is for legal proceedings where a dog might have bitten and has been seized by the police and there's a criminal prosecution. So that's what the majority of my work is.
And you began life as a police officer. So you had this structure, you understood a narrative for investigating a crime. And then you stepped into this world of dogs and looking at dog crime and went, oh my gosh, there's no structure here. Like nobody is assessing these dogs in the same way. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so when they assess the risk of human violence, they use risk assessment models that have been that are evidence-based. So they've researched the factors that can increase the risk of somebody using violence or sexual violence and physical violence. So researchers told them, okay, these are the things that can increase that risk. And they use that evidence to create risk assessment models, which are validated and evidence-based, so that there's a structure that can be used by experts uniformly, really. And that's quite well established in the field of human violence. So that was missing in the field of dog behaviour. So what one assessor, the way things are at the moment, what one assessor considers important, another assessor might not consider important. It's not very often that home assessments take place. Very often the assessments consist of us effectively poking and prodding a dog to assess that dog's response in a controlled environment, which is highly stressful. And we know from research that that isn't predictive of how a dog would behave when they're in the care of their familiar family members, in their familiar environment, in a domestic home. So how dogs behave in a kennel environment is very often hugely different to how a dog would behave in their home. So what's been happening is that the assessments that have been used in court are very, very focused on the half an hour or so that an expert will spend with a dog that's been transported to an assessment area in a van from a kennels, having been seized sometimes years before the assessment and remained in kennels for that length of time. They're exposed to lots of provocative stimuli, things that are scary, effectively, to see how the dog reacts to that in that context. And very often, the dog's responses in that context are used to inform the court of whether the dog poses a risk to public safety or not. So I was kind of quite shocked that that's what was happening, which led me to want to change that and investigate other ways of doing it that would be more predictive of whether a dog would pose a danger to public safety in public, which is what we're talking about.
Yeah. It's got to be a fair test, hasn't it? There's no point in doing a test if it's not a fair test. If it doesn't measure what we're supposed to be measuring, that just seems bonkers.
Yeah, but this has happened for years and years and years. So there's a lot to change. And also, I personally don't think that it's ethical to expose a dog to things that's going to frighten that dog if that test isn't predictive of anything.
Yeah.
So for me, there's kind of always been like a bit of an ethical dilemma. Now, while I've been doing this research, I've had to use those provocative tests because there hasn't been an alternative for me to present to the court. And
so could you give us an example, Helen? Like, I know you and I have actually both I've done some expert witness work, but as you say, it's harrowing. If I'm brutally honest with you, it's really not an easy job to do. And the level of detail that the courts need is huge. And so, I take my hat off to you for the amount that you do in this area. It's huge. But what kinds of provocative tests are we talking about here? So just to give everybody a kind of narrative, we've taken a dog, it's done something, it's been aggressive aggressive towards somebody, perhaps in the home or maybe outside the home in a park, and it's been seized by police. And then a couple of years later, somebody has taken it out of a kennel. And so what kinds of provocative tests are sort of normal, might you say, in this arena?
So the most common tests are a food guarding test. So placing a bowl full of food down and seeing how the dog feels when you remove that. I personally, if I've done that, I would do that with my hand. But one of the things that has been used by some experts is the artificial hand on a stick, which looks weird anyway. So pointing that at a dog, so that's one test. There's response to startles. So that quite commonly is dropping a metal food bowl on a concrete floor quite close to the dog to see how it reacts to startle. Dog testing. Now, I personally have a real issue with using real dogs in dog tests, because very often the dog that I'm assessing, I don't know anything about that dog's response to other dogs. And so the poor stooge dog that's been exposed to that, I have a bit of a concern about. So I use an artificial dog, and there's some research about how effective that is. And it does obviously have its limitations. So exposure to another dog, whether that be a real dog or an artificial dog. Rough handling, and threatening. So when it's how the dog responds to somebody standing over them and shouting at them or roughly handling them. I do close handling tests as well in a lot of my cases, where I'll just stroke the dog, see how the dog reacts to that, and then I'll look in the dog's ears like a vet would, or in the dog's mouth, and pick up a paw, things like that. But obviously that depends on the dog and how nervous the dog is. And my kind of rule of thumb when I've been doing these tests is, if I don't feel the dog is comfortable and is going to be comfortable with me doing that test, and it's going to cause the dog to potentially react using aggression, then I don't feel it's appropriate to do it. So I would just write in my report why I haven't done it. Unfortunately, sometimes these tests are done, the dogs are exposed, these tests are done one after the other as well. Yeah. So you've got a huge amount of trigger stacking. So gradually, the level of stress is increasing. The more the dog's exposed to something that's scary, that's building and building and building. And unfortunately, in some cases, dogs are tested and then they're tied to a fence where they can't move. And those tests are repeated, which personally, for me, I find really, really uncomfortable. Especially as we know that these tests aren't predictive of how a dog would behave outside of that environment. So it's really tough, for dogs at the moment. So that's kind of why I really wanted to change this, because I could see, A, it wasn't predictive, and yep. B, it's unethical in a lot of cases, in my personal opinion.
So it's hard, isn't it? Because I can, imagine there's some that are listening and going, well, how else would you know if a dog is likely to kick off if you don't put it under some stress and put it under some pressure, and see how it handles stressful situations? But we do have, the burden is on us to make sure that the welfare of the dog in our care is paramount, isn't it? And so, ultimately, if the test doesn't prove what it's supposed to prove, if it's not a successful test, it's a false positive, isn't it? It's saying, oh yeah, we managed to get the dog to be really growly and scary by shutting it in a kennel for 2 years on its own, taking it out, poking it with a plastic hand, trying to nick its food, getting in its face. And you think, well, okay, so if a dog has enough personality after all of that to still be like, I don't like that, then that dog would fail the test. That does seem awfully unfair.
Yeah, there's a piece of research by Patrick and Bradley, and it was published in 2016, and it's called No Better Than Flipping a Coin. And they looked at provocative tests that are done because these types of tests were often done in rescues, in shelters as well, to decide whether a dog could be rehomed or not. We have changed here in the UK quite a lot, and our big rescue organisations like Dogs Trust Dogs, PTA, Battersea, have changed their assessment methods, thank goodness, to things that are more predictive. So they looked at these battery tests, as they're called, these provocative tests, and they established that they really weren't predictive. They followed up dogs that had reacted maybe in kennels or not reacted to these tests, and they followed them into family homes and have seen that the tests aren't predictive of how the dog would behave out of that environment. So knowing this, my kind of argument is, well, why are we exposing these dogs to this awful test when it's not going to tell us anything? It tells us how the dog's reacting in that context. You know, dogs aren't great at generalizing, as we know anyway. So how they behave in one situation can be completely different. So the best way of assessing a dog and how it's going to be in public and whether it's going to pose a risk to public safety is in the control of the person that's going to be looking after it in that environment, in my opinion. But when dogs are seized, obviously that's quite difficult, because we can't then get owners in, take the dogs out. You know, it's a really complicated situation.
How do you solve that? It's a really good question.
Yeah, so this is where the research has come in. So the stuff that's used in the human violence assessment is based on evidence of lots of research of what things will increase the risk of a dog using human-directed aggression. So we started this process by trying to search the scientific literature for all of the factors that are likely to increase the risk of a dog biting a person. So we did that through systematic reviews. I focused on, so the research project was, there were two research students, myself and my colleague Anne. She looked at the dog factors, I looked at the people factors. And what we found was that there were loads and loads of factors. In fact, when we've added everything together, there's more factors relating to people and the environment than relating to the dog that are likely to increase risk. So to take a dog-centred approach, which is what we've been doing historically, really doesn't make any sense when actually the environment and the people in charge of the dog are more influential in terms of risk.
That is huge. And I remember, you know, Helen, you and I hung out, 3 years ago now. Those that have been following the Future of Dogs podcast would have had their last episode of season 1 at the beginning of our dog bite problem event. And actually you came in to our second dog bite problem event to present, didn't you? And that event was called, Is It the Dogs? And we were saying, are we living in a generation where our dogs are just more aggressive, or badly bred or something? Is it the dogs themselves that are the reasons why we're getting these high levels of dog bites in the UK? And everybody agreed, no, it's not the dogs, it's the humans, although we need much better data. And that was one of the key conclusions that came away from that, wasn't it? So how encouraging is that 3 years ago, that was the narratives. Actually, it is the people, and now what you're saying is your recent research is really proving that is the case, that it's much more to do with humans and the environment than it is towards the dogs. That's massive.
So taking that information, we also, because there are gaps in the scientific literature, there are areas that aren't studied, and we identified those. Some of that came from my own personal experience, things that I've seen that I think have influenced risk. So we decided to ask some professionals who've worked with dogs that have displayed human-directed aggression as well. So to supplement what we found in the literature, so we can see some gaps here. What do professionals think? So they provided us with their opinions. A lot of the stuff was the same, but they also identified some areas. And one of the biggest areas that came up that professionals felt was a huge factor in whether a dog would use aggression or not was the owner's understanding of dog behaviour and body language.
Wow.
And that's hardly been researched, actually. But out of all of the risk factors that were identified, that was spoken about most frequently by the professionals we surveyed, they felt that this was a huge area of risk when that understanding of behaviour, that expectation of what a dog should be was unrealistic. So what we've done is we've taken all of this information from the systematic reviews, the literature reviews, what the science tells us, what professionals tell us as well, and we've created what's called a structured professional judgment tool for assessing the risk of human-directed aggression. And this is a method that's been used in forensic psychology for many, many years and is validated and well established. And it's basically a process that guides an assessor through considering all of the factors that we know will increase the likelihood of a dog biting, and also looking at, if a dog did bite, the severity of any incident that would happen, because it might not be any more likely that a big dog would bite, but clearly if you're bitten by a big dog rather than a little dog, the injury is more likely to be severe. So it also looks at factors that will influence severity. The process also makes the assessor look at what risk management strategies could be put in place to minimise any risk. So instead of just saying, OK, this dog's really dangerous, what we're looking at is, are there strategies that can minimise risk? And also, is the person, the caregiver, and the environment suitable to employ these strategies? So is a caregiver, for example, able to do the things that we need them to do to reduce the risk? Do they recognise the risk that their dog might pose, and are they willing to kind of mitigate that? And is the environment okay for this dog? Because, as you know, sometimes the dog's great in one environment but can't cope in another. And so we look at the assessment process makes the assessor consider, would there be a more suitable environment for this dog? Rather than just saying the dog's too dangerous, what can we do about it? And that's what the courts need to know. So, because when they're making orders in court, like a contingent destruction order is where a court will say, OK, this dog can go back home, but there are some conditions that need to be in place to make it safe. So the court need to understand if the owner is able to carry out the things that an expert has recommended. So this process considers that as well, which hasn't really been done up until now.
So where would this fit in the process, Helen? This would be something that you as an expert witness would do after a dog has been seized, hopefully quicker than 2 years. Like if we can reduce that, that would be awesome, wouldn't it? These dogs don't need to be languishing in kennels for that length of time. But it would be a much better assessment process for any expert witness to use to look at the risk factors that are associated with aggression.
Yeah, so instead of, at the moment, each assessor doing their own test of what they think is relevant, which very often doesn't consider anything to do with the owner and the home, this would ensure that the expert considered all of those factors without doing the provocative tests. We still, as assessors, need to see dogs. We still need to meet dogs and interact with them. But I don't believe that we need to do the provocative tests. Bearing in mind that we know they're not predictive, because that research is told us by Patrick and Bradley. But we still need to interact with them. So as an assessor, you kind of get a feel for the dog and how sociable the dog is, I guess. How the dog engages in play. So, because one of the things that we need to look at is things like the dog's ability to manage their arousal levels, because quite often over-arousal is where a lot of our dog bites come from. Rather than just a dog being aggressive, it comes from a place of being overstimulated and can't really manage that very well. So, but we can look at that through play, by playing with a dog. I can establish how quickly this dog will get aroused. Can this dog manage their arousal without exposing it to lots of awful tests, So we still need to see dogs, but then the risk assessment tool takes the assessor through all of the factors, making sure everything's considered. And that's presented to the court in a very structured way. And what I would really like to see is for the court to expect an assessment to cover all of that stuff. That's kind of where we'd like to go with it. one of the things that came out of it was identification of all these risk factors. And the RSPCA reached out and asked for some help because they wanted to put things in place for their inspectors going into homes who on animal welfare investigations, where the inspectors might feel that dogs in the home might present a risk to family members in the home, specifically children.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing at the moment. There's no kind of risk assessment tool that people can use to identify safeguarding concerns in the home. So obviously, I have a background in child protection, so this is kind of right up my street.
That's perfect, isn't it? It's the Venn diagram of your interests.
Yeah. So another part of my PhD research was to develop a triage tool for people that aren't dog bite experts. They're not behaviourists, they're not expert witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
They're just lay people who are going into people's homes and they have a concern about dogs and children in that home. So this is intended, it's being piloted by the RSPCA inspectors at the moment. And it's going to be, hopefully, I'd like to see social care professionals using it, social workers going into homes, health visitors, and frontline police officers who might go to a home and see dogs and have some concerns but not be able to articulate that very well. So this is like a shorter tool that can generate a more thorough assessment and a referral to maybe social services or whatever agency is appropriate, to look more thoroughly at what's going on in the house with the view to identifying risk management strategies to prevent dog bites happening. This is a preventative measure. So if we can identify, okay, so this house is a little bit risky, there's not much structure, the dogs are a little bit stressed in the home, but there are things that we can put in place, just some education for dog owners, recommendations, things like using stair gates to provide some barriers to give dogs space and things like that. We can get in before something bad happens, right? So
important.
So the triage tool is intended to kind of is a preventative measure, whereas the risk assessment tool, as well as it can be used in rescue organisations for rehoming, and we're talking about using it in legal cases. That's kind of, the legal cases are always like reactive because something's already happened, but the triage tool is proactive and intended to prevent those cases where dogs are seized. So
and that's what we all want, isn't it? Actually, we've seen prevention is so much better than the cure often, isn't it? Anything that we can do to keep dogs in homes and to stop dogs from biting, that's what we want to be doing and focusing on. That is so super and encouraging, I guess, as well for me, Helen. And when I came out of rescue, I went straight into wanting to teach people about body language, because that's exactly what that for me was what's going on here is people can't read dog body language. That's what we need to do. That was my low hanging fruit. I'm like, if we can do this, then it will, stop so much more drama later. And we're definitely a lot further than we were when it comes to being able to read and understand body language. But I wonder, Helen, can you tell us from your research, like what are some of those risk factors? Like when we look at why dogs are biting people, and that's the big question, isn't it? That's the $1 million question. It's probably $1 billion question actually in this day and age. Why? Like, what does the research say? Like, what are we sure about? What are we? There is a bit of evidence, but it's not as strong. Like, what are the risk factors for human-directed aggression?
So there are, in our risk assessment tool, there are 24 risk factors. I can't remember them all off the top of my head, but I can go through some of them. And 3 severity factors. So factors that will increase the severity of an incident should one happen. So some of the things that we've identified are in respect of so there's kind of dog factors, people factors and environmental factors. And the way that it's broken down in the risk assessment tool is historic, what's going on at the moment and what can be put in place for the future. So things like a lack of understanding of dog behaviour and body language is a risk factor by the caregiver of the dog. We know that dogs that have had little socialisation in puppyhood or experienced trauma in puppyhood are more likely to use human-directed aggression. Dogs where there are untreated health and medical conditions, dogs that are in pain, unpredictable environments are a risk factor. So where a dog isn't sure what's happening on a day-to-day basis, like either owner behaviour or the environment is unpredictable for that dog, that usually results in a dog experiencing more fear, anxiety and stress, which in itself will then increase the likelihood of a dog using aggressive behaviour.
So that might look like lots of different people coming around on different days and times, the humans not having like a routine for bedtime or something like that. Would you think that would be like in an unpredictable environment, having things kids around and things like that?
Yeah, lots of things like lack of clear boundaries for the dog. So the dog, those dogs that, for example, are sometimes allowed on the sofa and then other times told off. That's unpredictable. That the dog doesn't know when it can go and when it can't go on the sofa, doesn't know that at the weekends it's allowed on the sofa and on a Monday it's not, for example. So that's kind of that unpredictable behaviour. We know that owners who are anxious and not confident in handling their dogs or or worried when they take their dogs out for a walk, how the dog's going to behave, we know that can increase the likelihood of the dog using aggression as well.
And just to be clear, we're talking about human-directed aggression. So we're not talking about dogs being aggressive with other dogs. All of this research is around dogs being aggressive to human beings, just to clarify.
So it's the risk of dog bites specifically. So human-directed dog bites. We know that dogs that are reactive to things in the environment, like dogs that chase cars, chase bikes, chase other dogs, that get over-aroused, and they can't manage that arousal very well, those dogs are more at risk. We know that owners that don't appreciate the risk that their dog may pose, also, that's a risk factor. So, for example, the owners that say, oh no, my dog would never bite, and don't appreciate that actually any dog can bite. If they're put in a situation where they feel they've got no choice, they're going to bite, So it's a lot about owner attitudes as well, willingness to engage with a professional if it's recommended. So those owners that if a risk assessment is done, and for example, if I went to see an owner and said, okay, so I think if you just work with a trainer for maybe 5 or 6 sessions to kind of understand a bit about why your dog behaves like this and how you can mitigate any risk, and the owner says, no, I don't need that. I'm not doing that. I don't need my dog doesn't need any training. That's a risk factor,
Interesting. Wow.
So all of those things make up our kind of 24 factors. Busy environments where dogs are kind of overstimulated and don't have safe space to move away. There's a lot.
Really cool. Really. And what are the things that would affect severity? I'm guessing the size of the dog is one of them, just because of its mass. Like, big dogs make big holes in things. Anything else that would affect severity?
We haven't included breed, and we've not included breed for lots of reasons. Firstly, looking at the research, we don't believe that breed is a predictor of bites. We also know that there are huge problems with breed identification. Now, as I do breed identification cases, this is a kind of a real bugbear of mine. I get called to rescues and they say, oh, we've got a pit bull or we've got an XL bully, and I turn up and I go, no, it's really not. It's it's a Labrador cross.
Wow.
So the problem is if we're asking people to ID breed as part of this risk assessment model, we know that breed identification is really, really poor. The ability of people to successfully, even professionals, to identify breed types. So we'd be putting in a risk factor that we can't accurately assess anyway. So it would make the whole tool invalid, in my opinion. And also, we know it's not a predictor. So instead of breed, we focused on, so one of the risk factors in the tool is an inappropriate dog for that home environment. So if a dog is in a home where the owner can't meet the breed typical needs of that dog, that is a risk factor.
Okay. Wow.
So are the dog's needs being met?
So we're talking like about breed type drivers. So
yes.
that conversation piece is in there. But just to clarify, you are not including breed because the research says that we can't, because it's not in science, it's not a predictive indicator of behavior, which is...
It's not a predictive indicator, and even professionals are not very good at identifying breed types. So in our severity measure, we have the size of the dog, because ultimately it's the size of the dog that affects the severity of the bite.
Yeah.
So that's more relevant than what breed that dog is. So we use the size of the dog, the nature of any previous bite. So, for example, if a dog has bitten before and demonstrated no bite inhibition, that's very different to a dog that has bitten but really tried to use bite inhibition to get their message across without causing significant harm. So we look at the nature of any previous bite, whether it was one bite, a nip, please leave me alone bite, or a bite, I'm coming back for more bite, because those are two very different things.
Yeah. And that's really new, isn't it? Because actually, the concept of bite inhibition, I remember Dr. Ian Dunbar talking about using that scale in America, and that concept that a dog is able to, it could do a level 5, but it only did a level 1. And so it's inhibited, it stopped itself from doing a full bite. But that was not a thing, was it? In the UK, we just didn't have that language. It's like, did it bite or didn't it? It's black and white. So that's a huge step forward.
Yeah, there's lots of different types of bites. So people that use the risk assessment tool have an understanding of what the different types of bites and whether the dog's used inhibition or not, and how relevant that is to how risky that dog might be in the future. And then the third severity factor is the presence of vulnerable people. So that may be children, and it could also be people with disabilities who may be unable to move away from a dog quickly. For example, elderly people as well, who might not be able to react very quickly or aren't strong enough to be able to manage the dog safely. So those factors, obviously you take into account the size of the dog when you're looking at vulnerable people, so those factors are all our severity factors. And when an expert's making their assessment, they consider all of those things they then decide on an overall risk judgment of how risky they believe the dog may be, taking into account the risk management strategies that they've identified. Okay, so we know that this dog, for example, is reactive to other dogs, but we could get some training with some sessions with a behaviourist. We could muzzle the dog in public if that's going to be beneficial. The owner's willing to do those things and is really keen to understand more about that and engage. So that risk can be mitigated. Wow. So all of those things are taken into account when they make a final risk judgment, which is then used to take it further, whether it be rehoming of a dog from a rescue organisation, so their potential adopters are willing to put strategies in place to make sure that the dog's safe in their home, or whether that be a defendant in court and the court are satisfied that they can make an order that means the dog will be safe in the hands of that owner because they've agreed that they'll put these strategies in place.
Gosh, that's so huge, Helen. That's such a huge piece of animal welfare work,
Yeah.
Like that is just going to change, because we've always lived in a world where it's like the dog has bitten a human. That's it. the whole book is thrown at you. Like there really isn't, biting people, not okay. And the huge assumption is your character is wrong. Your character is the character that would bite a human. How very dare you? And now it's like going, actually, there's so much more nuance to a dog bite. There are so many more reasons why it's our fault. And I know most people who work with dogs, we tend to be dog centric anyway, don't we? We tend to be like, it's not their fault. And sometimes there are dogs who are, as you say, they have a very low threshold for frustration. They have very little ability to kind of bounce back from arousal. And they might manage their arousal by wanting to bite and rag things. That's a very terrier trait. Anything in a Jack Russell and on anything terrier wants to do that. That's what they want to do. That's how they calm themselves down. And so it's understanding that that is an innate part of dogs. We have little predators in our house. That's what we have, guys. It shouldn't be a shock to us that sometimes they want to bite things. It is a very natural dog behavior, isn't it? But that some of these dogs might have a future in a different environment, because we can see, oh my gosh, all of these variables were wrong. Like this dog was set up to fail, really, in lots of ways. And maybe if we put them somewhere else, then they would succeed.
Yeah. So the risk assessment tools are as much about prevention as prediction. The whole point of it is to identify things. And there are dogs that we just can't put enough management strategies in place for the dog to be safe in the public domain. And a part of being an expert is acknowledging that and making those difficult decisions. And it is really difficult, but, I have a duty to protect public safety in my role as an expert witness. And so that's part of what I have to do. But a lot of the time, we can find suitable environment and sufficient management strategies for a dog to live a safe and happy life. But it does depend on that dog's caregiver, hugely. So this is why it doesn't make sense for us to just assess the dog and not consider where the dog's going to be living and who the dog's going to be living with. So hopefully that will change. It's going to take a little while, I think, for it to kind of roll out, but
so what's that? Tell us more about that, Helen. What's the process now? Like, you've got this incredible tool. It's going to change the way that people assess, especially if it is rolled out en masse. Like, what needs to happen for that to be a sort of national scheme, would you say?
So, like any risk assessment tool, we do have to validate it so that we can say, okay, so we've done loads of research and this tool is predictive. It works. But we've got to start somewhere, right? So that the validation process actually will take quite a long time, because we need to find dogs that are young and we need to, or in rescue, that we can follow over a period of years so that we can say, okay, so these factors were in place. This is what's happened with this dog. Like, do a yearly check, for example, to see how what factors have changed. How the dog's managing, to get an idea of how predictive it is. One of the biggest problems with it is, and this is the same in the human world, if you have a dog that is identified as being really high risk, it's the same as a human offender that is deemed really high risk. That human offender is not going to be released into society because they're deemed really high risk. So you can't work out how things would have panned out, and it's the same with the dogs. So if we've got a dog that's considered really high risk, we can't follow that dog up. That dog's going to have to be euthanized. So it's really complicated, but what we're doing is I've got another paper coming out soon, hopefully, which is the qualitative study stuff, and then
very
paper
exciting.
which introduces the actual tool itself. I'm going to start using the tool myself now. My thesis is, I can cite my thesis in my work, and I have some colleagues that are also going to start using it in their work, so we can start gathering some data and see how the courts respond to the tool.
Amazing.
What I need really is for a big rescue organisation to use it in their work. And I think
Sure.
the RSPCA, Dogs Trust have certainly expressed an interest. So I'm going to reach out to Battersea and some other organisations to see if they want to try and use it in their adoption processes.
Mm-hmm.
And we can collect some data that way. And the triage tool, the RSPCA are piloting that, and I'm going to reach out to the College of Policing to see if they will trial that as well in a couple of police forces. I've identified a couple of forces that would be willing to trial it. So
amazing.
There's some work to do with that. So I've kind of got to use it myself really to see how the courts respond to it, because it's going to be new to the courts.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that because they're familiar with the human violence risk assessment model, that they'll appreciate what it is and think, okay, yeah, let's give this a go. But yeah, so it's going to take a little while, I think. But once I've kind of got comfortable with using it myself, then I'm hoping to set some courses up to train people to use it if they would like to use it, whether they be expert witnesses, whether they just want to, because as a behaviourist, if you're doing working with a dog that's bitten, it's kind of really important to assess that risk.
Absolutely. Huge.
Because it also helps you identify management strategies. So while you're working with that client, there are things that we can put in place that will mitigate this risk. So,
and I think a lot of us would do that in our heads, but actually to have that written out in a helpful, dog bite data collection form. When we take dog bite information, any dog bites, we've got a form that we would fill out on, what happened, and we do collect that data. But actually to have this would be super helpful and probably help you. Am I right? To gather even more data.
Definitely.
On that tool.
Absolutely, yeah. And like you say, most of us as behaviourists, the stuff that's in the tool, we consider that. We're thinking about that when we're sitting with our clients and we're talking to them. We're thinking, okay, so there's clearly no structure in this house. That's going to be quite difficult for me to navigate. And but it just provides us with an evidence-based aid memoir, I guess, to go through when we're making our assessments of risk, and it makes sure that we're considering everything. And like, I just think it'll be really useful, even if people just use it in their own practice, so they're aware of all the things that we know can increase risk in that home.
Is it something, Helen, you think you'd ever use with the customer? Like, do you think you'd ever show the person whose dog you're assessing kind of some of those factors? I'm just thinking that, one of the big things that you said there was somebody's lack of ability to recognize that they need any help. And I know when we go into most dog owners' homes, there's at least one human who's paid you to be there, hopefully. Otherwise, you just break into people's houses. But there's sometimes maybe a couple of members of the family are like, I don't need this. This is really annoying that I have to do any dog training at all. And do you think that could be quite a helpful tool to kind of go, actually, there's like several risk factors here that are important for us to consider?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously it's tricky, isn't it, to kind of frame it in a way that's like not judgmental and getting people's backs up.
Yeah.
But if you can say, well, evidence has shown us that this is actually a risk factor, so we kind of need to work on this, to keep everybody safe. It's like, it's not you saying it, the evidence is saying it.
That's it.
This risk assessment model is saying, rather than it coming from you want to say, well, listen, guys, you've all got to get on board with this or it's not going to work.
100%. Yeah, exactly.
You could say, well, listen, the evidence says this is one of the things that we need to work on together. So, yeah, I think it might be helpful. And so I'd like to train people to use it going forward. It'll just be a little while I get these papers out. Hopefully not long. They're all kind of in the pipeline, but publishing a paper isn't a quick process. So
come on, Helen, you finished your doctorate now. Look, you must have loads of spare time.
I know.
It's not that way, is it?
No,
you're under very high demand
constantly.
Yeah. It's true. You're the best in the country. It's as simple as that, Helen. And, as I say, we're so grateful to have you on the show, because you have had, how many assessments would you say that you've done of dangerous dogs?
Um, Hundreds, well in excess of 300. I
Wow.
kind of used to keep a tally of it, and I just got to the point where I haven't got the time to keep the tally anymore.
I love your posts though. I get so much joy out of like following you on socials because I get to see these like incredible dog stories, and you're like, this is Rudy, and you know, he's finally back home after, and I'm just like, this is so huge. And obviously also those that aren't as fun too, those stories come up, and it just helps you to kind of maintain that, like, this is a complicated landscape that we're in with real animals with real feelings and families that are associated to these dogs. They're not just some like magazine statistic. These are, you know, people's buddies who've just gone a bit, had a really bad day.
It's heartbreaking. Really heartbreaking, because a lot of the time it's just something that could happen to any of us, you know. It's a freak accident, and the dog's been taken from the home, the family are devastated. It's really heartbreaking to see people struggling and having to kind of explain to them that it might be quite a long time before their dog comes home. Is tough, you know. They want the dogs home, and it can be years sometimes in some cases. And that's a huge problem, and something that, again, I would really like to address with the court system, and hopefully I will. It's just having the time to do everything. But it's a tough old world, to be fair.
Helen, your heart is massive. Like, how most people wouldn't cope going from, you know, child abuse cases really into dog abuse cases. Like, that's a huge amount of hard work. Like, how do you manage with that level of complexity and stuff with the work that you do? What keeps you going to do all of this amazing stuff?
So I'm not going to lie, I have had some struggles. About 18 months ago, I had a really, really tough time where I was at the point of burnout. Compassion fatigue was real.
Not surprised.
And I really
totally
struggled.
fair.
I really struggled. And what's helped me actually is to step back a little bit. And because I've been writing up my thesis, I've not taken on quite so much work, because at one point because I work all over the country, I was literally driving every day to a different part of the country to see dogs. And dealing with sometimes, you know, fatalities as well. And it's heartbreaking. So I'd kind of had a bit of time away. I just did the odd assessment while I was writing up my thesis, but now I'm back in the thick of it. But to be honest, it's, for me, the way to navigate it is to speak to, I've got some close friends that I can speak to about it. I speak to Kendall Shepherd quite a lot.
Legend.
Who obviously has done lots of this work, so completely understands it. But yeah, I talk to people, and that's the only way that I can cope with it. And like I say, sometimes it's a bit tough, but I've learned now that I don't like saying no. You know, people reach out to me and say, "Oh, I really need, can you help me get my dog back?" And it's very hard when someone's saying that for me to turn around and say, "Look, I can't." But I've got a lot better at saying I can't and passing their details on, you know, passing other experts' details on and things like that. So
well done. And hopefully now you've got this amazing training course, you know, you'll be bringing up the next generation of expert witnesses, and you'll have like this new wave of incredibly well-trained, compassionate individuals who know how to do this work well, to the standard that you've been doing it at, because it really massively varies, doesn't it? I mean, even in behaviourists are unregulated. So what we're looking at right here is a field of people who, you know, arguably anybody could say, I'm an expert witness, and give a report to court, which is terrifying because there's no regulation of trainers. So this is a really exciting piece of work that is going to allow there to be a much better standard of assessment and of quality of care and of welfare of the dogs while they're being assessed. The ethics behind it just sounds to be infinitely better than anything that already exists. And
that's what I'd really like to do is I could step away a bit more and train other people and offer them also a bit of a mentorship, so they're not on their own, because that's one of the hard things as an expert. You are on your own.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of conflict with, if I'm working for the defence, for example, for a dog owner, although I'm always independent, I still have a lot of conflict with the police sometimes, who might just see a dog as dangerous and want that dog destroyed. And I'm trying to explain that, actually, look, this is why the dog bit. We know what went wrong, and there were things we can do to stop it again. And there's conflict a lot of the time. And that's tough. That wears you down, the constant conflict. So I would always, if I train people to be expert witnesses, I've got a few people that have shadowed me, like Dan Shaw, Bethany Long, who've shadowed me. And those guys will always pick the phone up, and I'm there. I always say to them, just ring me, we can chat about it. And I think having somebody, so I'd like to form a little group of experts who can chat, and there's support. Because at the moment there is nothing like that. So it's just people I know that I reach out to, So I'd like to do that, so that I don't have to do it. Don't feel quite so bad when I say to dog owners, like, I can't do it.
I'd love to do that. I'd love to jump on that course as soon as it's ready, Helen. I am there. That is a very exciting course.
And this is it, those of us that are experienced behaviourists, keen to learn, we need really good behaviours, because there are people doing this who have no behaviour qualifications whatsoever, and they're standing in a court and telling the court whether they think a dog is dangerous or not. And I find that incredible.
It's quite scary,
you don't need to be a behaviourist to do it. If you have got the confidence to stand up and argue that you are one in court, even though you've got no behaviour qualifications, then you can do it.
That happens. Okay. That happens on television as well, just as easily. And that is what's so scary, isn't it? Really, because we really do need people who know what they're talking about, who are signing up. Because otherwise, it ends up being not what you know, but who you know. And arguably, the people who are getting picked to do those kinds of assessments, it's kind of a it's people that know people that get those kinds of jobs, then, isn't it? And that's tricky.
Absolutely.
I know for those of you that do want a little bit of education in the interim, if you head over to amplifiedbehaviour.com, I have Jim Crosby's veterinary forensics recording. He popped over from the US. He is very well renowned in the world for dealing with dangerous dogs. And he, again, is just going to back up a lot of what Helen says in the complexities of the assessment process and what really needs to be improved around all of that. So if you want a deep dive into that kind of assessment, then by all means, head over to my website and you can grab that course. But I'd also keep tabs on Helen, on what she's doing and where she is. And where could we find out more about that course, Helen, when it's been created and is live?
So I will promote it on my social media, on Facebook and Instagram. And also my papers, when I publish them, you can find them on social media and through my website as well, which is dogbehaviourexpert.co.uk. So as soon as things are in place, and I'll also obviously let you know, Hannah, so that you can promote it. And I've got lots of kind of professionals that are willing to share it as well. So hopefully people will be able to find out about it. And it shouldn't be too much longer. Things are happening,
lots,
but nothing's quick.
No, nothing that is worth patient. It. No, but if it's worth it, it takes a while, doesn't it? And that's okay.
Yeah.
So before I let you go, Helen, I know you and I are going to be doing a little bit of campaigning work together as well, which is really exciting. And you're looking at joining us with the Responsible Dog Ownership Umbrella campaign, and just looking at ways that we can improve enforcement in the UK, or data collection systems, really looking at, what are we doing? How are we collecting data? How could we get better data? Which is exactly what you've been doing with your risk assessment. It's just going, actually, how can we create preventative measures, and how can we collect better data that will help us to make better decisions? And I know that there was, at the end of the dog bite problem day that we did back in 2023 now, one of the big issues that was coming up regularly was the data is not consistent on dog bites in general. So do you think that might be something that we could have in the future, is a dog bite data collection form? Is that possible? Is it semi-formed? Where are we at with that? And what are the problems with us not having one? Why does it matter?
Yeah, so the dog bite data that we do have in the UK is really poor, and it comes only from NHS England and Wales. Now, what we know is that the dog bites that lead people to go to hospital, the dog bite data is relates to people that are admitted to hospital following a dog bite. Now, what we know is that around 1%, 1 to 2% of people that are bitten by a dog end up in hospital. The rest of them don't. So we're only picking up very, very few dog bite cases.
Gosh.
So what we need to know is all of those dogs that are biting people where people aren't admitted to hospital, which is the vast majority of bites. Mm-hmm. We need to know why those bites are happening. So the context of the bite, who's bitten, what kind of what context was the bite in? And the only way that we're going to collect that, I can see, is through professionals, through police when cases are reported to the police, veterinary professionals when somebody takes their dog to the vet and says, my dog's just bitten my child, for example, and I don't know why, can you help? There are lots of ways of gathering the data, but there's no consistency at the moment. And behaviourists, and dog trainers go into people's homes. If we had a standard way of reporting bites, I think a lot of the time people are worried that their dogs are going to be seized by the police if they report the bite. And I absolutely understand that. Mm-hmm. So we need to have a mechanism whereby people can report bites without that worry. And set up a data collection form that's universally used and a database to gather that data. So I'm going to start working on that in a view to be able to present that to the UK government and say, look, if we use this method to gather this data, we can much more accurately put dog bite prevention strategies in place because we know what's going on. So that's kind of the ultimate aim.
And it's true, isn't it? How many dog owners go, yeah, he did bite, but it was just one. And you just well, it's important. That's all important. But they do. Most of my owners are just well, he'll get put down. They don't even go to get seized. They just immediately think if someone knows that my dog has bitten a person, it will get put down. And then you meet the other owners who are yeah, he's only bitten the postman 2 or 3 times. And I'm do you know that if any of those could have been moments, if somebody wanted to prosecute you, then they could. And so it's really hard. It's getting that shame off. It's getting that shroud of off us, that we're able to communicate about these things without any shame, which is difficult, isn't it?
It's really difficult. And people are so scared of their dogs being seized. Yeah. And it is, dogs can be seized for just putting somebody in fear of being bitten. They don't even have to bite somebody. So if your dog jumps up at somebody and somebody says, I was absolutely petrified of this dog, it jumped up at me, legally the police can come and seize the dog.
Yep. Which people just don't know. They don't know that. They don't know their level of rights, actually, when it comes to dog behaviour. It's crazy. If your dog is, growling at somebody in the street and that person feels intimidated, that is cause for legal proceedings.
And in some parts of the world, so in Calgary, in Canada, they have a system where dog bites are reported, and then strategies are put in place before the need to seize the dog, or near misses, for example, are reported, and then there's subsidised behaviour consultations and education for owners that can be put in place before it gets to the point where a dog's taking chunks out of people and being seized, So we just need to create effectively a safe space for people to report incidents that are concerning, to get strategies in place to mitigate risk going forward and prevent those cases where the dog would have to be seized.
Really good.
Yeah, it's really complex, but I think it's worked in other parts of the world, and there's no reason why we can't do that in the UK. I think we just need to all work together at it and have the same end goal.
100%. And I think it's remembering, isn't it, that, you know, dog bites don't just occur in a vacuum. And so many people, it might be that that person says, oh, he's never done anything like that before. But actually he has. And it might not have been biting a person, but it might have been, you know, snatching a toy, or it might have been growling as someone came to the front door, or like areas where we as behaviourists would go, oh, actually that's an indicator there. That's something that we need to help him to manage. He's a bit scared of this particular person, or I always say he. It could have been a she. You know, she doesn't like it when people come home with shopping, and she hasn't had a walk yet, and that's whatever it might be for that particular dog. There are areas that we can help people to avoid dog aggression, and I know. We work sometimes with Carrie Westgarth. I know she's done some really amazing work with the Royal Mail to look at ways that we can protect our postmen, because they are really getting horribly bitten, aren't they? And most of that is prevention. It's saying, listen, let's just get our dogs away from the front door when you open it. Never open the front door to the post person. Just don't open the front door to guests, really. Pop your dog in another room. There's so much.
Put a stair gate between the dog and the door before you open the front door, and things like that. Yeah, and it's just sometimes it's really simple things that people don't think about. But it can prevent a whole heap of problems by just putting these little measures in. And the huge part of it is education, for sure. So, yeah.
It's amazing. Well, we're going to get there, Helen, and it's just such a pleasure to see, you know, the fruit of what has been, I know for you, just some really hard work, hard and difficult, not just hard as in long, but really deep and emotional work. So yeah, on behalf of everybody who's listening, we just wanted to say thank you so much for pushing through and getting this piece of research out. And I really hope to see that this becomes the standard. It becomes everybody's normal for assessing dangerous dog cases going forward, and we see less of them. Simple as that, because those preventative strategies are in place. So thank you and well done. It's amazing.
Thank you.
So we can get hold of you by going to, give me your website one more time.
It's dogbehaviourexpert.co.uk.
Amazing.
And on Facebook, it's Dr Helen Howell, Dog Behaviour Expert. So you can find me there.
Super. So nice hanging out with you. Thank you so much for giving us your time, Helen.
You're welcome. It's been lovely to speak to you.
And that's all for another episode of The Future of Dogs. Big thanks to our sponsor, Amplified Behaviour. Your host and producer is Hannah Molloy. Technical direction, audio and video producer is Mark Goslett. And the graphic designer is James Whipps.